This is like attempt number 8 to make this video, or make the start of these videos. I said I was going to do something on Air Force and fighter jets. I am going to do something on basically aircraft, fighter jets, Navy stuff. Basically, I'm going to cover the 6 type of fighters, what they're for, what they do, some examples, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about recommendations and some, I think, mistakes we've made in the past with that kind of stuff. It's the beginner's guide. So, feel free to leave your comments and talk about other things and tell me how stupid I am because I like one platform over the other, even though I'm not a pilot. Whatever. It's fine. A lot of it just is, I am swayed a little bit by second kind of cool, so, I do have my biases, but I think this discussion kind of needs to be had, and I think game designers particularly need to understand the difference between what aircraft are supposed to do, fiction writers, and also when you see a politician being lobbied to either buy something or don't buy something, find out what the deal is and maybe learn a little bit, because politicians are very short-sighted, and basically, you can't be any dumber than being short-sighted. I don't know what to say with some of these decisions that have been made in the last couple of years. So, all right, here we go. There are 6 types of fighters. I'm going to cover one in each one of these videos. The first is the air superiority fighter. Air superiority fighter, interceptors, light fighters, strike fighters, multi-role fighters, and attackers. Those are the types of fighters that exist. So I'm going to start with the air superiority fighter. As I repeat myself, here we go. What is the role of an air superiority fighter? What does it do? It denies the enemy fighter operations. It shoots down anything in the air that's a threat and has a sustained air-to-air threat presence on the battlefield. That is what an air superiority fighter is supposed to do. It is supposed to shoot down their planes so that you have air supremacy. You shoot down the things that are trying to shoot down your planes primarily, and then when those are cleared out, then you pretty much can dominate the sky. Air superiority fighters, the concept has been around pretty much, that was something in the Cold War. They've experimented it. Some people argue they perfected it with the F-15 airframe. I think things have changed significantly in terms of the F-15 being viable going forward. I'm not so sure about that. But that's basically what an air superiority fighter does. There's a doctrine to the design of air superiority fighters. There's the doctrine of maneuverability. That's the one the Russians believe in. Basically, the ability to, at any point in a dogfight, have your aircraft face whatever direction you need it to face. That's why you see things like the Su fighters, Su-27, Su-37, super maneuverable, very twisty. They do all kinds of really cool maneuvers. They see the Cobra maneuver in movies and stuff. There's a lot more aircraft than just the Sus that can do that, but they were the first because it's all about, it's all about basically being able to face any direction you want to be able to engage, look, shoot, or just basically turn your attention to. I don't think that's as relevant now with the way missile systems are and electronics are as it used to be. But it is still basically something that a lot of designers still design for and people still really appreciate in terms of, look at the Su-47. That was a very late developed Russian aircraft. And granted, it never went into production, but it's still, it's super maneuverable, and it's got some kind of stealthy features to it, and it's kind of the pinnacle of turn at any point in a dogfight, and what they call it, pull your asshole out your eyeballs or whatever, because it's just the way it can just flip and face whatever direction it wants to face. So that's the Russian school of thought. Reminds me a lot of the Italian school of thought in the beginning of World War II, and I think it's basically, that's like a history thing. We could talk about that another time. Lift, the school of lift. The school of lift is where you see basically larger kind of delta wings, usually something like the Raphael, something like the Gripen, something like the Eurofighter. It's a European school of thought. The idea is basically always be able to generate lift, no matter what speed you're moving, no matter what direction you're trying to face, and no matter what you're doing, always have enough lift, because then you can always lift your payload, you can lift a heavier payload, and you can stay basically in the air. You don't have to make any crazy decisions because the aircraft generates a ton of lift. That and the maneuverability ones, that's actually pretty good match in terms of how they, one's got one advantage over the other. It's kind of hard to say which is better. There's also a third school. It's called the School of Energy. This is the one I think is superior. It's the American school of dogfighting, but I still think it's superior for many reasons. What the School of Energy is basically preservation of kinetic energy in a fight. So you can maneuver, but you're not going to be the most maneuverable. You're going to have lift, but you're not going to have so much lift that it causes drag. You're going to keep your speed up, and you're going to turn, and you're going to outmaneuver people, and when it's unfavorable, you're going to be able to keep your kinetic energy and reposition. That is basically what the F-15C, or as A, like the original F-15, that is what that was designed to do, and no aircraft in terms of combat record has done it better. F-15's got, I think, 72 air-to-air kills, 0 losses. An F-15 has never been shot down in a dogfight by another fighter. That has never happened. That is how good the F-15's design was. Granted, it's 50 years old at this point, but there's something to the School of Energy. The United States adopted it, Japan adopted it, Israel adopted it. In fact, I think they have the most air-to-air kills with the F-15 because, everybody hates them who surrounds them. The Saudis adopted it, and that was recent. They still bought F-15s because they're like, yep, they still felt this was the most affordable and the best aircraft they could get for their money. And they train their pilots just like they train ours. This is about the School of Energy. Japanese, South Koreans, I might have repeated one of those before. They love the F-15. Countries that have it absolutely love it, and they do look down upon and judge other countries that have chosen other aircraft. So, that's basically the legacy of the School of Energy. A lot of that is tied into the F-15 because it's basically the guys who were veterans from the Cold War, Vietnam. They developed basically what's the strategy you need to win dogfights, and they figured out it's not about the maneuverability, it's not about the lift, it's not about the speed, it's not even about the payload. It's about preserving your energy. So you get basically something like the F-15 with a big wing, but not a big delta wing. With, fast engines, but it's not an interceptor. It's still got enough, wingspan, so it's not, super narrow. That's what the School of Energy is. And that's what you need to understand about basically air superiority fighters, is that there's different doctrine to how they fight, and you're supposed to shoot down everything else in the air. The rest of your capabilities, not that relevant. F-15C doesn't even have air-to-ground capability. The F-14 originally didn't have air-to-ground capability. All right, so here's some examples of some air superiority fighters. I'm going to stick to the U.S. inventory just so it doesn't get too long. The F-15A, which has evolved into the F-15C, been around since the 70s. Really old, but as I said, it's kind of looked at as the pinnacle of Cold War air-to-air combat, and I tend to agree. The F-14. The F-14 is an air superiority fighter, particularly the F-14D with the basically the engine upgrades and a lot of the more modern avionics, basically because that was, I think, 91 when that was introduced. It's the very last stage of it. That was a fantastic air superiority fighter, and it was basically one. Would you choose that or the F-15? You probably might want the F-15, but you can't land an F-15 on a carrier. For an air superiority fighter that you can land on a carrier, the F-14, that was pretty damn fantastic. Hard to fly. Air superiority fighters are the hardest in terms of training and learning and being good at what you're doing, the best of the best. That's why the Top Gun pilots they flew F-14s. And the Air Force's equivalent, they fly F-15s. Because it's just, the plane is built to do it, and it's not an easy task. And the plane will kill you. When you're up there, the plane's trying to kill you, and you're basically trying to learn how to, tame the Bronco so that you can go kill other people that are in the air. Basically, shoot down other aircraft. So, not an easy task being a air superiority fighter pilot. They look down upon the other guys, but they also don't get to shoot down airplanes that often. So, F-15C guys, they haven't had a kill in. I don't know. I don't know the last time. I guess the first Iraq War. Because the second Iraq War, the Iraqi Air Force basically crumbled on the ground before they even launched. I mean, the F-15Cs were, left out in the cold. But it's still a really important job, I mean, part of it is the deterrent of being up there. The other one I want to talk about, I guess I'll do in order of roughly in order of introduction, the F-18E. The F-18E is an air superiority fighter. In fact, it's the one that replaced the F-14. Now, what's with the F-18E? What's so special about it? Why is it considered an air superiority fighter? Well, the F-18C is a multi-role fighter. We'll get to that later. The F-18E, basically, it's bigger. It's got kind of some of the features of the F-15. It's actually a little stealthier. It's got a better payload. It keeps its energy better. That is what the F-18E does, and the Navy has decided basically back when they phased out the F-14, they said, look, the F-18E is pretty much doing the job that the F-14 is doing it, and it's doing it a little better, in our opinion, in terms of maintenance, takes up less space, because the wings fold and all this other stuff. So the F-18E has taken over. Recently, there's a Block 3 update that they basically F-18Es have started, Boeing started doing for their F-15Es and Fs. And, you know, you're talking like 10 AMRAAM long-range surface-to-air missiles, plus 2 Sidewinders and a cannon. Basically, the Australians looked at the F-18E, and they said, because they had F-18s before, and they said, yeah, that's what we want. And now the Canadians, who basically have CF-18s, which are basically, it's like an Air Force version of the Navy F-18. Now we're trying to sell them like, hey, you probably want the Super Hornets. The Australians really like them, and we've, you know, got the teething problems out of them. So the Canadians are looking at it. I suspect they probably will bite, because it's really easy to go from, and not easy, but an F-18 pilot who to then fly an F-18 Super Hornet is not that huge of a jump in terms of there's a lot of familiarity with the F-18 platform. The most important air superiority fighter we have is the F-22A. Now, a lot of people argue during the competition between the F-22A and the F-23 Black Widow, and the Raptor won. Some people say that was unfair. There's a lot of things about that. There was a place for the F-23. I think we should have actually bought some of those. But in terms of basically the F-22 doing everything that the F-15 can do, and a little better, keeping up the energy, it has very good maneuverability. It had better maneuverability than the F-23. It didn't have the same speed, but that, again, its speed is not as important as overall kinetic energy preservation. So the F-22A, that's basically the pinnacle right now of aircraft in terms of air superiority fighters. It's better than that crap the Russians and Chinese are introducing, by far. So, what do I recommend moving forward? I recommend we phase out the F-15C, and, you know, I don't know if there's any A's still even in flight, but those airframes, we're talking 70s, 80s, 90s at the latest being made, that they need to go. They're too old. It's obsolete technology at this point. We need to restart F-22 production. And basically, we're going to do a block upgrade to that eventually. I suspect it'll be like the F-22C, because basically the sensors in the F-22 were taught state-of-the-art until the F-35 came out, and now that's why the F-35's tech is being put in the new F-16, the F-18E is getting stuff from that. Like, you know, there's just sharing technology. And the 22, I think it's time for an overhaul. I think they need to restart production, and they need to make a significant amount of them. And then I guess I would probably call it the F-22C, because the B was a potential two-seater variant that they never ended up making. So yay simulators for saving cost. The F-22, one of the big issues is the cost. But the big issue of the cost is just because no one had ever made that type of airplane before, and basically they never, you know, they only built 100 of them. Had they built, you know, 1,000 of them, then the price per unit would have came down significantly, and spare parts would be much more available. They have to get rid of the F-15Cs and produce more F-22s. Do we need as many F-22s as we have F-15s? Maybe not. Probably not. The enemy's air forces are large, but they're not so large, and the roles of air superiority fighters have changed a lot, especially with like advanced air to ground defense, surface to air defenses. So I suspect that we don't need to have an unbelievable amount of F-22s, but it certainly would help. We need many more than we have now, because basically it's like they're stationed in like 2 places. It's like Alaska and I forget where the hell the other station is, and it's basically, if we're attacked by the Russians or the Chinese, the first thing they're going to do is target the airfields and the parts places that service the F-22, and they'll ground it. So great, we've got this plane that would be great, except for the fact that, you know, it's a vulnerability now, and we'll be defending ourselves with F-16s and F-15s, and so what was the point? We need more of those. There is the F-15EX that's being introduced. Will that function as an air superiority fighter? I don't know. I think so. The thing with the F-15EX is basically it's got all modern, updated avionics. It's got brand new airframes, which is super, super important, believe it or not, because metal breaks down after a certain amount of time. Even industrial, military metal, like it breaks down. Just you're flying in the air, you're putting G's on that metal. The airplane will fall apart eventually on you. And we had that happen over Libya. I think it was a Strike Eagle that happened too. They were just pulling out of a dive, and the plane just fell apart. There was a stress fracture that they didn't even know to look for. And that could have been really bad, but the Marines got the pilot, so it was all okay. But, you know, that shows you how old these planes are. So the EX is essentially the replacement. They want to move the Strike Eagle drivers and the regular C pilots over to the F-15EX. I think that's an okay stopgap measure. I don't mind having the EX on reserve in terms of basically like something that maybe the Air National Guards fly. I think it's a really good idea. It's got a really good payload, and if you configure it to fight air-to-air, that's not bad. It's not super stealthy, but it does have better electronic warfare capabilities. The F-15, in terms of the design of an airframe, it's still a good airframe. I think there was space for that in the basically U.S. military inventory. Plus, I think other nations, they're probably not. First of all, we're not going to sell them F-22s. So having something on reserve that's a good air superiority fighter that can actually maybe be exported or lent. You know, suppose Japan's at war with China and they need something like, well, we can't really dump F-22As on them, but we could dump EXs on them, and they could very easily basically get the facilities going to manufacture replacement parts and cross-train the pilots. It wouldn't be that hard. So I like the EX. I think there's another aircraft though that should have been looked at that was overlooked. And I was disappointed that it was overlooked. That's the F-15 SE, also known as the Sneak Eagle, or sometimes I've heard it called the Stealth Eagle. Apparently they did build prototypes. I'm not sure. I haven't seen like a real picture of what this thing is, but basically it's a stealth-enhanced F-15. It's got the internal weapons bay. I think it still can carry drop tanks, and it still has the ability to mount weapons on the outside. But it's basically a stealth F-15 with modern sensors. I love that. I love that idea. I love the idea of a supplemental stealth aircraft that is based on a pre-existing platform. I think that should be Air National Guard standard. Basically the SE. If I were a perfect world, I'd have, for air superiority fighters, I would have F-22s backed up by F-15 SEs, and maybe some EXs in terms of basically being able to shift them from air superiority fighter to strike fighter. Also, I just think it's a good investment long term because I think other countries are going to want that aircraft. So we need to restart F-22 production, and we got to find a proper replacement for the F-15C. In terms of basically Navy, I think they should have a stealth air superiority fighter. I think they should do something with the F-18E, and maybe there was a C version of the F-15 they were working on and they never went with. Maybe the Sneak Eagle can get something like that, tail hook and folding wings. I think they do need a stealth air superiority fighter. I'm not sure what the solution is. They may end up going with like a UAV or something. It's not as big of a deal for the Navy as it is for the Air Force and for basically Homeland Defense. So that's what I think about air superiority fighters. That's what one is. And comment. Let me know what you think. I mean, everybody's got their favorites. And basically, I'm going to move on to the next set.